The rain poured hard over the colony's metal rooftops, echoing through empty streets like distant drums. It was cold, windy and dark, exactly the kind of night no one stayed outside unless they had no other choice. Ray, a human mechanic living on the edge of the outer colony, tightened his coat and stepped through puddles toward his small home. His shift had run late again, fixing some mining bot that kept breaking down every 2 days. All he wanted now was to get home, dry off, and eat something warm. As he neared his doorstep, his boot kicked something soft on the ground. He stopped. There, curled up against the side of his door, was a small figure, thin, soaked, and shaking. At first he thought it was a blanket left behind, but then it moved. Slowly, the figure raised its head. It was a woman. No, not human. Alien. Her skin was a soft bluish shade, her hair wet and tangled around her shoulders, and her eyes, large, glowing, faintly purple, were filled with terror. Her clothes were torn and barely covered her. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her knees, and when she looked up at Ray, she whispered something he couldn't understand. Ray's heart jumped. "Hey, are you okay?" She flinched. Then before he could say more, she reached out and grabbed the hem of his coat, clutching it like a child would hold a parent's hand. Her grip was weak but desperate. She was crying, quiet, broken sobs that shook her entire body. I don't understand you," Ray said gently, kneeling beside her. "But you're freezing. You can't stay out here." The woman didn't speak again. She just kept looking at him, her eyes pleading for something, anything. Ray knew the law. Harboring undocumented aliens without reporting them could bring trouble. But this didn't feel like a criminal hiding. This felt like something else, something worse. He made a decision. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's get you inside." Inside his small home, Ray gave her a dry blanket and a seat near the heater. She didn't resist. Her hands trembled as she pulled the blanket around her shoulders. He gave her a cup of hot broth. She sniffed it. First, then slowly drank. She hadn't stopped looking at him. It wasn't fear anymore, it was confusion and maybe hope. Ray watched her closely. She looked young, maybe in her early 20s by human guess. The ridges along her cheekbones glowed faintly in the warm light. There were small scars on her neck, thin silver lines that looked like they came from sharp tools or restraints. He didn't ask about them. Not yet. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated. Then she tapped her chest and said, "Valera." Her voice was soft, musical, but tired. "Valera," he repeated, nodding. "I'm Ray." She blinked. Then very slowly she repeated, "Ray." It was the first time she'd spoken his name. It made something shift in his chest. Ray stood and grabbed a dry shirt from the closet. "You can wear this until I find something better." She looked at the shirt like it was a treasure. When she took it from him, her hand brushed his, ice-cold skin touching warm human flesh. She flinched at first, then she leaned just slightly toward the heat. She was starving for warmth. Ray stepped back to give her space. "You're safe here, all right? No one's going to hurt you." But her shoulders tensed. She looked toward the small window as if afraid someone might be watching. "What happened to you?" Ray asked gently. "Why were you outside like that?" She opened her mouth, but no words came, only tears. She gripped the blanket tighter, curled up smaller in the chair, and cried again, soft, painful sobs that filled the room like whispers from a nightmare. Ray felt helpless. He wanted to ask more, to understand, to fix whatever was wrong, but something told him it was bigger than anything he'd ever dealt with. He sat on the floor across from her, watching the firelight dance across her wet hair. He didn't speak, just waited. Let her cry. Let her know she wasn't alone. After a long time, her sobs quieted. She didn't speak, but she leaned her head against the edge of the chair, facing him, and then she closed her eyes. Ray watched her sleep, still holding the corner of his coat like she was afraid he might disappear. Something deep inside him whispered, this wasn't just a stranger in the rain. This was the beginning of something that would change everything. Valera didn't speak the next morning. When Ray woke up, the first thing he saw was her curled up in the corner of the room, still wrapped tightly in the blanket he gave her. The fire had gone cold, but she hadn't moved. Her eyes were open, quietly watching him, wide and unblinking. "Morning," he said softly, sitting up from the couch. She didn't answer. She just pulled the blanket closer, her fingers clenching it like it was her only shield in the world. Ray stood and walked to the kitchen. He kept his movements slow, careful not to scare her. He grabbed some food, instant oats, a banana, and hot water for tea. He placed the bowl and cup on the table near her and stepped back. "Eat, please. You need strength." Valera stared at the food. Her face stayed blank, unreadable. Then slowly, like a wild animal learning it was safe, she reached out. She sniffed the steam first, then took a tiny spoonful as if expecting poison. Ray sat back down on the couch and waited. After a few minutes, she began to eat more. Still no words, still no trust. But something had changed. She was trying. Later that day, Ray turned off his communicator. The news was filled with reports about a missing test subject from a secret outpost near the colony. No name was mentioned, only that the subject was female, dangerous, and not to be approached. Ray didn't believe it. Looking at Valera now, sitting in his oversized shirt and worn-out blanket, she didn't look dangerous. She looked broken, like someone who had been through something too terrible to speak of. Still, a voice in the back of his mind whispered, "Be careful." By afternoon, Ray had taken a big risk. He didn't report her. He lied to the system, logged a fake maintenance route for the day, and marked his location as off-grid. If someone came asking, he'd say nothing. When he returned to the room with some clean clothes, Valera wasn't in the chair. He froze. "Valera?" he called softly. No answer. Then he heard it, a soft rustling from the storage room. He opened the door slowly and found her crouched in the corner behind a box, hiding. She looked up, terrified again. Her hands trembled. It's okay," Ray said quickly, holding his hands up. "No one's here, just me." She looked at his face for a long second, then stepped forward slowly, still gripping the blanket, like armor. She didn't speak. She just stood in front of him and gently placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. Ray's breath caught. She wasn't touching him with fear. She was checking. She was trying to feel if he was real. Or dangerous. He placed his hand softly over hers. "I won't hurt you," he whispered. "You can stay here, as long as you need." Her lips trembled. Then, finally, she nodded. That night, a storm rolled in again. The sky turned dark and wild. Wind screamed through the cracks in the walls. Lightning flashed like fire through the clouds. Ray gave Valera his bed. He insisted. She refused at first, shaking her head. But when the thunder hit, she jumped. She hated loud sounds. She hated the dark. Eventually, she sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the blanket around her like it was her only friend. Ray moved to sleep on the couch again, but just as he turned off the lights, she whispered something. One word. "Stay." Ray turned. "You want me to stay?" She nodded once, then pointed to the floor beside the bed. He didn't question it. He brought a pillow and laid on the floor beside her, silent. In the darkness, neither of them spoke. But at one point, she reached down and placed her hand on his shoulder. Not afraid, not begging, just holding, like she didn't want to be alone. Ray stared at the ceiling, heart beating slow and steady. He didn't understand what was happening between them. But he knew one thing. Whatever had broken her, whoever had made her this scared, he wouldn't let it happen again. She didn't sleep much. Ray could tell. Every hour or so, she'd sit up, look around, press her ear to the wall like she was listening for someone, then slowly lie back down again. In the silence, one question kept echoing in Ray's mind. What was she running from? And worse, would it come looking for her? 3 days had passed. Valera still said very little, but her eyes said enough. Sometimes they burned with fear. Sometimes they went blank, like her mind drifted back to something she didn't want to remember. But every night she stayed close to Ray, sleeping near his bed, one hand always resting on the edge of the blanket, as if afraid he might disappear. Ray tried to give her space, but his curiosity kept growing. Who was she? What had happened to her? Why did she cry in her sleep every single night? That morning, Ray decided to do something different. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hover. Instead, he placed a small translator device on the table, right next to her tea. It's synced to your language, he said, sitting across from her. No pressure, but if you want to talk, it's here. Valera stared at it for a while. Her hands shook as she reached for the device. She touched it, then pulled her hand back. Ray didn't push. He just stood, smiled, and walked to the window. The storm had passed, leaving muddy paths and broken colony lights. Outside, life continued like nothing had happened, but inside, something was building. It wasn't until later, when Ray was repairing a broken comm chip in the garage, that he heard the translator beep. He turned. Valera was standing in the doorway. Her fingers gripped the device like it was a lifeline. "Can I sit?" the translator said, echoing her soft voice in English. Ray nodded quickly. "Of course." She sat on the bench beside him, quiet for a moment. Then, without warning, she asked, "Do humans keep secrets?" Ray blinked. Everyone does. Some big, some small. What if a secret is too heavy to carry? She whispered. He put the tool down. "Then you don't carry it alone." Her hands began to tremble. She held the translator close to her mouth. "I was sold." Ray's breath caught. "What?" Valera's voice shook as the translator spoke for her. "Not by strangers. By my own people. My clan needed resources. Humans came offering food and medicine. In exchange, they wanted someone with my blood." Ray felt his stomach twist. "Why you?" "My DNA is rare," she said. "It can heal, adapt, change." He stared at her, speechless. "They kept me in a white place," she continued, tears forming again. "No windows, no name, only tests. Every day, pain. Every day, questions. I stopped counting time. I forgot my own voice." Ray's hands clenched. "You escaped?" "Yes," she whispered. "One human, a young woman, unlocked my door, told me to run. I don't know why she helped. Maybe she felt pity." Ray swallowed hard. "And you ended up here?" She nodded. "I saw your door. I was going to keep running, but then I heard your voice. When you were fixing something outside, it sounded kind. It sounded safe." Ray couldn't speak. His heart felt heavy. Everything made sense now. The way she flinched at sounds. The scars, the silence. "I'm not dangerous," she added, her voice cracking. "But they say I am. They will come for me." Ray stood and gently knelt in front of her. "Let them come," he said. "They'll have to go through me." She blinked fast, confused. "But why? I'm nothing to you." "You were nothing. To them," he said firmly. "Not to me." Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked at him, not with fear this time, but something else. Trust. That night, for the first time, she didn't cry in her sleep. She didn't hold the blanket tightly. She didn't flinch at thunder. She slept beside Ray's bed peacefully, one hand resting gently on the floor, inches from his. Ray lay awake, watching the glow from the heater flicker on the walls. He now knew the truth behind her tears. But he also knew the truth wasn't over yet. If she had escaped, someone would be looking for her. And they'd come with fire. The next morning was quiet. Too quiet. Ray stepped outside to gather supplies from the old storage shed. The colony's security. Drones had stopped flying overhead. No messages came through his comlink. Something was off. When he returned, Valera was sitting in the living room holding a mirror. She was staring at her reflection like she didn't recognize the face looking back. Ray placed the tools down and walked over. "You okay?" She nodded slowly, but her eyes didn't leave the mirror. "Do you ever feel like your body isn't yours?" Ray raised an eyebrow. "Sometimes, after a long shift," he joked softly, but she wasn't smiling. She pulled up her sleeve. Ray froze. Underneath the soft blue skin on her arm, something pulsed, faint, almost hidden, a small metallic dot near her shoulder, embedded under the flesh. He crouched beside her. "What is that?" She hesitated, then spoke into the translator. "A tracker. Human tech. They planted it inside me while I slept, so I couldn't run far." Ray's jaw clenched. "You didn't know?" "I felt something," she whispered. "But I didn't want to believe it." Ray examined it carefully. It was small, barely visible, but real, and active. "That means they can find you," he said, voice low. She looked at him, eyes wide with fear. "I brought danger to your door." Ray stood. "No, they brought danger by touching someone who never agreed to be part of this." He stormed into his workbench area and returned with a scanner and a small device. "This might hurt," he said, kneeling. "I've felt worse," she replied quietly. Ray's fingers worked fast but careful. He numbed the area with a cooling patch and used a micro tool to trace the edge of the implant. It was deeper than expected. Valera didn't flinch. Not once. She stared at the ceiling, breathing slowly. The only sound in the room was the gentle beep of the scanner. After a few tense minutes, Ray pulled the chip out and dropped it into a sealed container. He held it up. "Not tracking you anymore." She finally exhaled. Her body relaxed, but tears slid down the sides of her face anyway. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for this, but for seeing me as more than a test." Ray placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not a test, you're not a machine, you're a person, you deserve peace." That night he took the chip out to the junkyard behind his house and smashed it under a hydraulic press. He wasn't just hiding her anymore. He was protecting her. But as he returned, his comlink buzzed. A private message. Encrypted. No sender. It read, "We know what you've done. Hand over subject V47, no more warnings." Ray stared at the screen, his heart pounding. They were watching. Valera appeared behind him. She didn't ask what the message said. She didn't need to. "I have to go," she whispered. "Before they hurt you." "No," Ray said firmly. "You're not going anywhere." "You don't understand," she said, eyes full of panic. "They don't stop. They burn through anything in their way. They'll burn you too." Ray reached out and held her hand. "Then we make a plan. Together." She looked down at their joined hands and didn't pull away. That night they didn't sleep. Ray opened up his old transport maps, dusty smuggling routes he hadn't used since the last war. Valera helped him reroute energy signatures to mask the house. For the first time, she moved with purpose, not fear, but even as they worked, the wind howled outside. The night felt darker than usual. Something was coming, and Ray knew they had only hours left. Inside his heart, he made a silent promise. They may have marked her, but he would mark her story, with fire, with love, with resistance. He would not let them take her again. The sun had not risen yet, but sirens were already wailing in the distance. Ray stood by the window, his jaw tight, watching lights flash, faintly beyond the colony wall. Not the soft lights of patrol drones. These were stronger, more serious. Black signal class. They had sent hunters. Behind him, Valera sat quietly, wrapping bandages around her arm where the tracker had been. Her eyes were distant, her voice silent since the night before. But Ray could feel it. The fear, the guilt, the ache of running for too long. They're scanning homes, he muttered. Sector by sector. She didn't move. Ray turned to her. If they find you, they won't just take me, she said. They'll erase you too. Ray smirked grimly. That's what worries me less. She looked up. He stepped closer, kneeling in front of her. What worries me is how easy it would be for me to let them take you and live my life like you never existed. That's what they expect. But I'm not built that way. Her lips trembled. You don't know what they'll do, she whispered. They'll put me back in the box, cut my skin open like pages in a book. Then we don't let them. He reached for her hand. This time she didn't hesitate. Ray powered up his old atmospheric crawler. It was slow, bulky, and outdated, but hidden under the tarp behind his garage for years, it had one advantage. No digital systems, no trackers, no signal leaks. It was a ghost. Get what you need, he told her. We're leaving in 20 minutes. Where? Outlands, south of the energy farm. There's a cave system. Smugglers used to hide there. It's quiet, forgotten. Valera stared at him. You've done this before, she asked. Ray looked down. Once, during the war, I helped someone escape a labor ship. Human. He nodded. Barely a kid. They branded his back with a number, just like they did to you. Her voice cracked. What happened to him? He made it, changed his name, got a family now on Jupiter's third moon. She didn't ask more. She just said, then let's go. They drove in silence through early morning fog. The colony faded behind them, its cold towers and steel walls swallowed by mist. Ray glanced at the mirror. 2 black drones were flying high in the sky, scanning below. He veered the crawler off the main trail and into a dry ravine. It jolted, hard over the rocks but held steady. Valera gripped the seat tightly. Her eyes never stopped moving. They'll use facial match, she whispered. They always do. Ray reached under the seat and pulled out a small kit. Not if you look different. Inside were old smuggler supplies, false skin patches, color overlays, and 1 black scarf. He handed them to her. She stared at the items, unsure. You sure about this? She asked. Only if you want to live, he said. She nodded. Minutes. Later, the blue-skinned alien with silver eyes was gone. Now she looked like a tired, tan-skinned colonist woman. With storm-gray eyes, Ray smiled softly. Almost too human. She tried to smile back. It didn't last long. By noon, they reached the edge of the canyon. Ray turned off the engine and covered the crawler with rock dust. They walked the rest of the way. Quiet steps over cracked stone. Wind blew dry sand around them. Finally, they reached the cave entrance, narrow and hidden behind a rock split. Inside, it was cold but safe. Ray dropped his pack and looked around. No signals. No cameras. We're off-grid. Valera touched the cave wall gently. This feels strange. It's freedom, Ray said. But before they could relax, Valera stiffened. Her eyes turned upward. Ray, listen. Faintly, far above them, came the sound of engines. Not 1, not 2, 6. He ran to the edge of the cliff and looked through his lens. Dark ships were descending toward the colony, military style, and they weren't human. Valera stood beside him, her voice hollow. My people. Ray's head whipped toward her. They're here for you? No, she whispered. They're here, to make sure no one knows I ever existed. Ray looked at her, stunned. You're not just hunted by humans? She shook her head. I'm wanted by both worlds. The cave was silent, but Ray's mind was not. He kept pacing near the entrance, glancing at the scanner every few minutes. The signal showed several ships had landed near the colony. One was definitely human. The others? Not. Valera sat near the cave wall, knees drawn to her chest. Her disguise had faded. Her glowing silver eyes had returned. There was no point hiding now. Ray stopped pacing. You were never supposed to leave that lab, were you? She nodded once. I'm a secret, not just to the humans who took me. My own species wants me erased. If word gets out that one of us was sold, it could start a civil war. Ray took a deep breath. So we're not just running from hunters. We're running from an entire system. He dropped to the ground beside her. We need a real plan. By nightfall, the air had changed. A dry, sharp wind howled through the canyon. Drones were scanning wider zones. Even the shadows felt thinner. Ray turned to Valera with determination in his eyes. I have one last ship. She looked up. You told me it was sold. I lied. She blinked. Ray stood, pulling a dusty keycard from his boot. I hid it years ago under a false identity, buried under the old scrapyard beyond this ridge. It's unregistered. Quiet. But the catch is... He paused. You can't board it unless you're bonded to a citizen. Her brow furrowed. What does that mean? It means a fake marriage. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then Valera asked, softly, is it legal? Ray nodded. In this sector, a citizen union overrides alien holding orders. If we link our IDs, no one can separate us. Not without breaking interstellar law. She looked at him carefully. Why are you willing to do this? She asked. Ray met her eyes. Because I won't watch them take you again, because you matter. And I've spent too many years fixing machines while people were being broken. Her voice was barely a whisper. Then, yes. The bonding process was strange but fast. Ray uploaded his ID to the link terminal. Valera stood beside him, her fingers brushing his. The scanner read their vitals, their eye patterns, their emotional sync. It asked no questions. It just beeped and displayed. United. Temporary mate link active. Valera turned to Ray. Is that it? He smiled softly. You're now my wife. On paper, at least. She hesitated, then gave a tiny laugh. It was the first real smile he'd seen on her face. It made his chest ache. They moved under the cover of darkness. Ray led them through narrow canyon paths, staying low, always checking the sky. Once they had to freeze in place as two search drones passed overhead. At last they reached the scrapyard. Rusty metal towers rose like grave markers, hiding the treasure beneath. Ray activated a coded switch and a pile of broken panels shifted, revealing a narrow entrance. Inside was a small, dark gray ship, old, but intact. Valera touched its side. It smells like freedom. Ray powered it up. The hum of the engine was soft, barely audible, but just as the doors sealed, a warning flashed. Unauthorized craft detected. Blockade in effect. Valera's voice trembled. They've sealed the airspace. Ray didn't blink. We go under. He rerouted the ship's engine to deep core thrusters. There was an ancient escape, sinking an old mining tunnel that cut under the colony walls and curved out into the open desert. No one used it anymore. No one, but smugglers. The ship dove underground, the walls of the mine brushing past like shadows. The light flickered. The air felt tight. Ray's hand stayed firm on the controls. Valera watched him in silence. Then she whispered, Ray? Yeah? If we make it out, what then? He didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at her, he said, Then we start something new. The ship burst through the far end of the mine out into the starlit desert sky. Behind them, distant alarms rang out. Red lights flashed high above the colony towers, but they were already gone. Too far. Too fast. Ray set the coordinates for the edge of neutral space. Valera leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes. She didn't look afraid anymore, only tired. but free. In the silence of space, Ray reached over and took her hand. "You're safe now." She didn't reply. She just squeezed his hand and didn't let go. The stars outside the ship glowed like cold lanterns. Ray sat at the front console, hands resting on the quiet controls. The engine purred gently behind him, steady and calm. It had been hours since they escaped the colony. Beside him, Valera slept curled in a blanket, breathing slowly. Her head rested against the wall, her expression soft. Peaceful. The first time Ray had seen her sleep without flinching, crying or clutching the edge of her seat. She was no longer afraid. But Ray couldn't sleep. Not yet. He walked to the back of the ship where the data console blinked quietly. A message had come in, encrypted, unmarked, bouncing through dozens of relays. He opened it. "You've made your choice, Ray. She's yours now. But understand, nothing hidden stays hidden forever." He stared at the words for a long time, then he deleted them. He returned to the cockpit, sat down beside her, and looked out the window. They were drifting toward the edge of neutral space, a no-man's zone, full of lost ships, unclaimed rocks, and broken satellites. It was the only place no one wanted to look, and exactly where they needed to be. When Valera woke, she sat up slowly, blinking at the unfamiliar stars. Ray looked over. "Sleep okay?" She nodded. "I didn't dream." He smiled. "That's a first?" She gave a small, thoughtful smile back. "No, it means I didn't remember the pain." Ray leaned back in his seat. "Then it's working." "What is?" "The escape, the healing." She looked at her hands. "Do you really think someone like me can heal?" He reached out and gently touched her hand. "You already are." Later, that day they landed on a small moon, unnamed, unpopulated, full of caves and mineral-rich soil. Ray had mapped it years ago during a salvage run. He'd always planned to return, just never like this. They stepped out onto the dusty surface. The wind was thin, the air barely breathable without a small filter mask, but the silence was beautiful. Ray opened a hidden storage box in the ship and pulled out small building units, modular, homes, solar units, heating pods, all salvaged, all functional. Valera watched him in awe. "You planned all this?" He looked around. "Not exactly. I just always hoped I'd have a reason." She lowered her head. Her voice was soft. "Now you do." Over the next few days they worked side by side. They built a small shelter beside a rock wall, installed a shield dome to hide their energy signature, set up water filters and heating coils. Valera moved differently now, stronger, steadier. She didn't jump at sounds. She didn't cry at night. She started humming sometimes in a strange but beautiful melody that echoed softly through the rocks. Ray would listen quietly, smiling. He didn't ask her to stop. One evening, as the twin suns began to set behind the mountains, Ray cooked a small meal from supplies he'd packed. He handed her a plate and sat beside her on the stone bench they had carved together. Valera took a bite, then looked at the horizon. "I used to believe no place could be safe," she said. "Not the stars, not the planets, not even my own body." Ray said nothing. She turned to him. "But now, I feel like I belong. Not to a place, not to a people. Just here." He met her eyes. "With me?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, with you." The wind passed through the cliffs, carrying her words like a promise. They sat in silence for a while. Then she whispered, "I was afraid of everything, even kindness." Ray turned to her. "And now?" She smiled, not a sad smile, not a nervous one, a real one. "Now, I'm not afraid at all." That night, under a sky filled with quiet stars, Valera placed her head against Ray's chest as they lay beside the warm heater inside their small home. He wrapped an arm around her gently. No words were needed. Not anymore. She had come to, him in tears, carrying fear, scars, and silence. But now, She carried peace. And Ray? He no longer felt alone in the universe.